Greece, 2021. Part 1. Shadows of Doubt. The sun bathed the island of Mykonos in golden light, casting its warm glow across the whitewashed houses that dotted the hillsides. The sea, sparkling under the afternoon sun, gently caressed the shores, a familiar rhythm that had always brought peace to the residents. But inside one of those small homes, the atmosphere was far from peaceful. Sophia, a 26-year-old woman, sat in a chair by the window, staring out at the vast, endless blue, her heart heavy with despair. Sophia had once been full of life. As a young schoolteacher, her days had been spent nurturing the minds of children, filling classrooms with laughter and curiosity. Her evenings had been filled with the joy of walking along the beach, feeling the sand between her toes, and listening to the soothing melody of the waves. But that was before the pain, before the mysterious illness that had slowly stolen her mobility and, piece by piece, her spirit. It started so subtly, a small ache in her legs, something she brushed off as fatigue from long days of teaching. But the pain had grown, spreading like a creeping vine, until it consumed her. Some days it was sharp and stabbing, making every step agonizing. Other days, it was a dull, heavy throb that made it impossible for her to rise from her bed. Worst of all were the sudden episodes of paralysis, moments where her legs simply refused to obey her will, leaving her stranded and terrified. No doctor could explain it. Visit after visit, test after test, left her with nothing but more questions. It might be stress, one doctor said dismissively. Perhaps it's something neurological, another mused, though he offered no solutions. Sophia clung to each appointment with hope, only to leave each one feeling more helpless than before. Now, after months of searching for answers, she had stopped looking. There was no point. Whatever was happening to her, it was beyond the reach of modern medicine. Inside her home, the air was thick with the scent of olive oil and herbs, a reminder of the life she once led, full of warmth and vitality. The walls, adorned with simple yet meaningful artwork, framed memories of better times. Photos of her standing tall, smiling with her students, her family, her friends. Each image felt like a painful reminder of the person she used to be. Sophia shifted uncomfortably in her chair, pulling the blanket tighter around her legs as if it could shield her from the harsh reality of her condition. The warmth of the sun coming through the window was no match for the coldness she felt inside. She had always been so strong, so independent, but now she was a prisoner in her own body, trapped by an illness no one could name, and she had begun to lose hope. Across the room, her grandmother, Eleni, sat quietly, knitting as she did every afternoon. Eleni was a woman of unshakable faith, a true believer in the power of prayer and divine intervention. Though her hands were weathered with age, her spirit remained as strong as ever. Her lips moved silently, whispering prayers for her granddaughter, trusting that somehow God would provide a way. Sophia loved her Yaya dearly. The old woman had raised her after her parents passed away when she was just a child. Yaya Eleni had taught her everything: how to cook, how to care for others, and, most importantly, how to believe in something greater than herself. But now, as she sat watching her grandmother silently pray, Sophia couldn't help but feel a pang of frustration. How could faith help her now? How could prayers heal legs that refused to walk? Yaya, Sophia murmured, her voice weak and filled with defeat. What if this is just how things are meant to be? What if there is no cure? Maybe I should just accept it. Eleni paused her knitting, her sharp eyes lifting to meet her granddaughter's. The room fell silent, the only sound being the distant waves crashing against the shore. After a moment, Eleni rose from her chair and walked over to Sophia, her steps slow but steady. She placed a warm, gentle hand on Sophia's shoulder. "My child," Eleni said softly, her voice full of the wisdom that comes only with age. "This is not the end. You are meant for so much more. I know you are hurting, but sometimes what we suffer in the body has roots much deeper in the soul." Sophia shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "But Yaya, I've seen every doctor on the island. They can't help me. No one can help me." Eleni's face softened, her expression full of understanding. "Doctors know much, but they do not know everything. There are things in this world that go beyond the physical. I believe with all my heart that your illness is not just of the body, but of the spirit. And there is a place where we can find answers. A place where miracles still happen." Sophia blinked, confused by her grandmother's words. "What are you talking about?" Eleni turned and walked toward the small wooden table in the corner of the room, picking up a delicate cross that had been passed down in their family for generations. She held it tightly in her hands, her eyes focused on the intricate carvings as if drawing strength from it. "The monastery of Panagia Torliani," Eleni said softly. "It is a place of great faith where many have found healing, not just for their bodies, but for their souls. I want to take you there." Sophia felt a wave of resistance rise within her. A monastery? How could a place of prayer do what modern medicine could not? She had never been particularly devout, not like her grandmother. The idea seemed far-fetched, almost absurd. And yet, there was a part of her, small, buried deep, that longed to believe in something again. That longed for a miracle. "You don't have to believe in it, Sophia," Eleni continued, sensing her hesitation. "Just come with me. Let me pray for you there. If nothing else, let's ask God to show us his plan for you. You have nothing to lose." Sophia stared at her grandmother, seeing the depth of love and faith in her eyes. Despite her doubts, despite her fear, she nodded slowly. "All right, Yaya, I'll go with you. But I don't know if I can believe in a miracle." Eleni smiled, her face lighting up with hope. "That's all right, my child. Sometimes, all we need is to take the first step, and God will meet us halfway." As Eleni gently kissed Sophia on the forehead, a small flicker of something, perhaps hope, perhaps fear of the unknown, sparked within Sophia's heart. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in months, there was a faint glimmer of light in the darkness that had consumed her life. In the quiet of the room, the sea continued its steady rhythm, and outside, the world carried on as it always had. But inside Sophia's heart, something had shifted. The journey to the monastery, though yet to begin, had already started to change her in ways she couldn't yet understand. Part 2. The Pilgrimage of Hope. The morning sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft, golden light over the island of Mykonos. The peaceful quiet of the early hours was broken only by the gentle rustling of olive trees swaying in the breeze and the distant cry of seabirds as they circled above the shimmering sea. For most, this was just another serene morning on the island. But for Sophia, this day felt like the beginning of something far more significant, a journey toward the unknown. Sophia sat in the back seat of the car, staring out the window as they drove along the narrow, winding road that led to the monastery. Her legs, though wrapped in the same heavy blanket as always, felt different today. Perhaps it was the anticipation of the pilgrimage ahead, or perhaps it was the weight of her decision to follow her grandmother's faith, but something stirred within her. It wasn't hope, not yet. More like a cautious curiosity, a sense that something beyond her comprehension was unfolding. Yaya Eleni sat beside her, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The older woman had insisted on accompanying Sophia, even though the journey to Panagia Torliani was long and the road difficult. Her face was serene, but the deep furrows in her brow revealed the quiet determination that had carried her through so many trials in her life. Her faith, unwavering and strong, was like a lighthouse in the storm, guiding them both towards something greater. "Yaya, do you really think this will help?" Sophia asked, her voice barely louder than a whisper as she continued to stare out at the passing landscape. The road twisted and turned, revealing the ancient, craggy hills and the occasional glimpse of the monastery perched high above them, its white dome gleaming in the distance like a beacon of hope. Eleni glanced at her granddaughter, her soft smile never fading. "I don't just think it, Sophia. I know it. God never abandons his children, especially when we seek him with an open heart. Sophia swallowed hard, her doubts still lingering despite the comfort her grandmother offered. She wasn't sure she had an open heart. She wasn't even sure she had any faith left. The months of agony had drained her of so much more than just physical strength. Her spirit, once vibrant and full of life, had been dulled by the constant disappointment of unanswered questions. And yet, as the car climbed higher toward the monastery, there was a small part of her that clung to Yaya's words, as if the belief of one could somehow compensate for the doubt of the other. The landscape grew more rugged the closer they came to Panagia Torliani. The olive groves thinned, giving way to jagged rocks and steep cliffs, their surfaces dotted with wildflowers and dry grasses that danced in the wind. The car struggled on the narrow path, its tires crunching over gravel as it wound up the hill toward the monastery's entrance. Sophia could feel the tension in her body building as they neared their destination. The idea of being healed, of finding some sort of miracle here, felt like a distant dream. She had grown so accustomed to the pain, the weakness, and the frustration that she no longer dared to imagine what life would be like without it. What if nothing changed? What if this was all for nothing? Those thoughts weighed heavily on her heart. The car finally came to a halt at the foot of the monastery, and the air was filled with the scent of wild thyme and the salt of the sea carried on the wind. Sophia could hear the soft sounds of the monastery in the distance, the gentle tolling of a bell, the faint murmur of voices in prayer. There was something timeless about the place, as though it existed outside of the world she had known for so long. Eleni stepped out of the car first, her movements slow but deliberate. She looked up at the monastery with reverence, her eyes closing briefly as she whispered a prayer of thanks for having made it here. Sophia hesitated, her hands gripping the edge of the seat as she gathered her strength to move. Her legs, stiff and uncooperative, seemed to resist the idea of standing, as if they too were reluctant to believe in what might come next. "Take your time, my dear," Eleni said softly, her voice carrying the patience of someone who had walked this path of faith for many years. "There is no rush. God's work does not follow our timeline." With great effort, Sophia pushed herself out of the car, her body trembling slightly as she tried to steady herself on the uneven ground. The monastery loomed ahead of them, its ancient stone walls gleaming under the midday sun, while the white dome at its center seemed to touch the sky itself. It was a beautiful place, its simplicity a stark contrast to the turmoil that raged inside her heart. The entrance to the monastery was framed by an archway covered in vines, the leaves casting dappled shadows on the ground. As they passed through, Sophia felt the air change. It was cooler here, quieter, as though the very walls of the monastery held within them the prayers and hopes of centuries of pilgrims. She could hear the faint echo of footsteps on the stone floor, the murmurs of monks in quiet conversation, and the soft rustling of the wind through the trees that bordered the courtyard. They approached the main courtyard, where a large stone fountain stood at its center, the water trickling gently into the basin below. Monks in simple robes moved about, tending to the gardens and greeting visitors with serene smiles. The atmosphere was peaceful, almost otherworldly, and for a moment, Sophia felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. But it was fleeting. As soon as they stepped further into the monastery, the doubts came rushing back. What if this didn't work? What if she left here in the same state she arrived, broken and hopeless? Sophia clenched her fists at her sides, trying to push those thoughts away, but they clung to her like shadows, dark and persistent. Yaya Eleni, sensing the turmoil in her granddaughter, placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Sophia, it's all right to be afraid. Faith is not the absence of fear, but the courage to move forward in spite of it. Trust that we are here for a reason." Sophia nodded, though she wasn't sure if she truly believed it. They continued walking, their footsteps echoing softly against the cobblestone pathway that led toward the chapel. The doors to the chapel were open, revealing the dimly lit interior where candles flickered in the shadows, their flames dancing like small beacons of hope. Icons of saints adorned the walls, their painted eyes seeming to watch over those who entered. offering silent prayers on their behalf. As they entered the chapel, the scent of incense filled the air, thick and sweet, wrapping around them like a blanket. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the stone floor, and the soft chanting of monks echoed through the vaulted ceilings, their voices weaving together in a hymn that seemed to transcend time and space. Sophia looked around, taking in the solemn beauty of the place. It was ancient, and yet it felt alive, pulsing with the energy of those who had come before her, seeking the same thing she now sought: healing, redemption, a miracle. Her heart ached with the weight of it all, the hopes and dreams she had long buried beneath layers of doubt and fear. As they approached the altar, Yaelini knelt down in front of one of the many icons, her hands clasped tightly in prayer. Sophia stood behind her, watching as her grandmother whispered fervent words to the saints, her faith radiating from her like a beacon. Sophia wanted to kneel, to join her grandmother in prayer, but something held her back. The weight of her doubt was still too heavy. And then, a voice broke through the stillness. "Welcome, child." Sophia turned to see a monk standing nearby, his face gentle, yet worn with age. His eyes were filled with kindness, and his presence seemed to fill the room with warmth. "I am Father Nicholas," he said, his voice soft yet firm. "We have been expecting you." Sophia blinked in surprise. "Expecting me?" Father Nicholas smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. "Yes, you are not the first to come seeking what you have lost, and you will not be the last. But do not worry, my child. God always knows when we are ready, even if we do not." Part 3. The Battle Within. The air inside the chapel felt heavy, thick with the weight of centuries of prayers, hopes, and fears that had been left behind by countless pilgrims. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows on the stone walls, while the scent of burning incense clung to the air like a protective veil. Sophia sat on a simple wooden bench near the altar, her body tense, as though waiting for something, anything, to happen. Father Nicholas, the elderly monk who had welcomed them, stood before her, his hands clasped gently in front of him. His eyes, though clouded with age, held a deep, knowing warmth, as though he could see into the very depths of Sophia's soul. He had seen many come through these doors, burdened by the weight of their suffering, their doubt, their longing for a miracle. And he knew, without a doubt, that Sophia was no different. Her face, though calm, could not hide the storm that raged inside her. "Child," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight of authority and compassion, "you have come seeking healing, but healing comes in many forms. Sometimes the battle is not with the body, but with the spirit." Sophia flinched at his words, feeling the truth in them hit her like a physical blow. She had fought so hard to find answers to her illness, chasing medical explanations that never came, clinging to the hope that somewhere, somehow, a doctor would give her the cure she so desperately wanted. But what if it wasn't her body that was broken? "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "How can this be anything other than physical? I can't walk. The pain, it's real. I feel it every day." Father Nicholas nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Yes, the pain is real, but pain can come from many places, not just the body. Sometimes, the spirit carries wounds that manifest in ways we cannot explain. You have carried the weight of your illness for so long. It has clouded your heart and mind. But I believe there is something more at work here, something that has attached itself to your despair." Sophia's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding as if it were trying to escape her chest. The words he spoke stirred something deep inside her, something she hadn't been able to name until now. Despair. That was what had taken root in her soul, growing like a shadow that consumed everything in its path. She had lost hope long ago, and with it, her will to fight. But now, faced with the possibility that this battle was not just physical, a new fear crept into her heart. "Do you think it's a spirit?" Sophia asked, her voice barely audible as the weight of the question settled over her. Father Nicholas was silent for a moment, considering her question with the gravity it deserved. He did not answer quickly or without thought. Finally, he spoke, his tone both gentle and firm. I believe there is a darkness attached to you, feeding off your despair and your fear. But it is not stronger than the light of God. Whatever it may be, it can be driven out, but only if you are willing to fight. Faith, my child, is not passive. It is an active force, one that requires us to confront the darkness within us. Sophia's mind raced, the words swirling around her like a storm. Could it be true? Could her illness be something spiritual? She had never been one to believe in such things. She had always been grounded in the physical world, in what she could see and touch. But now, sitting here in the quiet stillness of the chapel, surrounded by the presence of something far greater than herself, she couldn't ignore the possibility. I don't know if I'm strong enough, she admitted, her voice cracking as the weight of her fear and uncertainty pressed down on her. I don't even know if I have any faith left. Father Nicholas stepped closer, kneeling before her so that his eyes were level with hers. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and the warmth of his touch seemed to ease the tension that had gripped her body for so long. Faith does not come from being strong, Sophia. It comes from surrendering. It is in our weakest moments that God's strength shines through. You do not have to fight this battle alone. Let us pray together and ask God to guide you through this darkness. Sophia hesitated, her heart racing as a mix of fear, doubt, and something else, something unfamiliar but powerful, rose within her. She wasn't sure what to expect, wasn't sure if she believed in miracles, but there was something about Father Nicholas' presence, about the peace that seemed to radiate from him, that made her want to try. She nodded slowly, her throat tight with emotion. Okay, I'll try. Father Nicholas smiled softly, his eyes full of encouragement. That's all God asks of us. Now let us begin. He stood and gestured for her to follow him toward the altar. Yaya Eleni, who had been quietly praying in the back of the chapel, rose from her knees and joined them, her face filled with quiet determination. She placed a hand on Sophia's arm, offering her silent support as they knelt together before the altar. The candles flickered softly in the dim light, casting a warm glow over the icons of saints that adorned the walls. Father Nicholas lit a fresh candle and placed it on the altar, the small flame symbolizing the light of hope that had begun to flicker inside Sophia. He bowed his head and began to pray, his voice low and rhythmic, the words ancient and powerful, though Sophia couldn't fully understand them. As he prayed, Sophia felt a strange sensation building inside her. At first, it was just a subtle pressure in her chest, but it grew steadily, becoming heavier and more intense with each passing moment. Her breath hitched as she tried to focus on the prayer, on the words she didn't understand but could feel deep within her. The pressure grew, and soon, it was as if something was trying to push its way out from inside her, clawing at her heart, her mind, her very soul. Her body began to tremble, and panic surged through her. "What's happening?" she gasped, her voice barely more than a whisper. Father Nicholas continued to pray, his voice growing stronger, more commanding. "Do not be afraid, Sophia. This is the battle. The darkness will resist, but it cannot stand against the light. Trust in God's strength. Pray with me." Sophia's breath came in short, sharp gasps as the pressure inside her chest grew unbearable. It felt like something was tearing at her from the inside, trying to hold on to its grip over her. She squeezed her eyes shut, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to hold on to whatever shred of faith she could muster. "God, please, help me," she whispered through her tears, her voice shaking with fear and desperation. As if in response to her plea, the pressure inside her surged one last time before it broke. A wave of warmth washed over her, flooding her body from head to toe. The trembling stopped, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she could breathe deeply. Her heart, which had been pounding in her chest, began to calm, and a deep, profound peace settled over her. Father Nicholas' voice softened, the intensity of the prayer giving way to quiet reverence. "It is done," he said, his eyes filled with the same calm that now filled Sophia's heart. "The darkness has been driven out." Sophia opened her eyes, her breath still shaky but steady. She looked down at her legs, half expecting them to remain as lifeless as before, but something had changed. There was a lightness in her body, a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in so long. Tentatively, she shifted her legs, and to her shock, they moved. Tears welled in her eyes as she placed her hands on the stone floor and slowly pushed herself to her feet. Her legs trembled, not from weakness, but from the unfamiliar sensation of standing again. Yaya Eleni gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth as she watched her granddaughter rise. "Yaya," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "I can stand." Eleni's eyes filled with tears as she embraced Sophia, her hands gripping her granddaughter as though she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Praise be to God," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Praise be to God." Part 4. Walking toward the light. The heavy wooden doors of the chapel creaked open as Sophia, supported by her grandmother Yaya, Eleni, and Father Nicholas, took her first steps outside. The bright light of the afternoon sun greeted her, a sharp contrast to the dim, candlelit interior where moments before, the spiritual battle for her soul had taken place. The air was cool and crisp, filled with the scent of wild thyme and the salt of the sea. It felt as though the entire island had paused, holding its breath in reverence for the miracle that had just occurred. Sophia's legs trembled slightly beneath her, not from pain or weakness, but from the sheer wonder of movement. For months, her legs had been heavy, lifeless, prisoners to an affliction no one could explain. But now, each step felt like a rebirth, a rediscovery of something she had once taken for granted. The simple act of walking, of feeling the ground beneath her feet, sent waves of disbelief through her. It felt surreal, as if she were watching someone else, an illusion of herself, take these steps toward the future. Yaya Eleni's grip on Sophia's arm was firm, but trembling with emotion. Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks, her lips moving in silent praise as she looked at her granddaughter with wide, astonished eyes. The Yaya who had been Sophia's rock throughout this journey now found herself on the verge of collapsing with joy. "My sweet Sophia," Eleni whispered, her voice thick with tears, "I knew God would not abandon you. I knew He would deliver you from this pain." Sophia could barely respond, her throat tight with emotion. "Yaya," she faltered, the words failing her. The weight of the moment was too great, too overwhelming for anything as simple as words. She squeezed her grandmother's hand in silent gratitude, knowing that no matter how much she thanked her, it would never be enough to express what she felt in her heart. As they reached the courtyard, Father Nicholas stepped back slightly, giving them space. The courtyard was beautiful in its simplicity. The stone path was lined with flowering plants, vibrant bursts of color against the ancient stone walls of the monastery. A fountain gurgled quietly in the center, its water shimmering under the sunlight, providing a sense of tranquility. A few monks and pilgrims moved about the grounds, their heads bowed in prayer or reflection, unaware of the extraordinary miracle that had just taken place inside the chapel. Sophia paused for a moment by the fountain, her hand resting on the cool stone rim as she looked around in awe. The world felt different, more vivid, more alive than it had been in years. Every color seemed brighter, every sound sharper. The chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the distant call of the sea. All of it seemed to carry a new meaning. She was alive, truly alive, in a way she hadn't been for so long. Eleni, still at her side, turned to Father Nicholas, who had been watching them with a gentle, knowing smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with reverence. "Thank you for helping my granddaughter." Father Nicholas shook his head humbly. "Do not thank me, Eleni. I am but a servant of God's will. It is He who has delivered Sophia, and it is her faith, however small it may have felt, that allowed this miracle to take place." Sophia's gaze fell to the ground, her heart still heavy with the memory of her doubts. "But I didn't have faith," she said quietly, almost ashamed to admit it. "I came here because of Yaya. I didn't believe in miracles." Father Nicholas stepped forward, his eyes kind but firm. "Faith does not always come easily, Sophia. It is not something we summon at will. Sometimes, it is born from the smallest seed of hope, even when we feel there is nothing left to believe in. What matters is that you open your heart, even if you were afraid. God hears our prayers, whether they are spoken with certainty or with doubt. It is not the strength of our faith that matters, but the act of turning to Him. Sophia nodded, taking in his words. She had come to the monastery broken, lost in despair, unable to see a way forward. But now, standing here in the light of the sun, she realized that the healing she had received went far beyond her physical body. Something had shifted inside her, something profound and irrevocable. The darkness that had clouded her heart for so long was gone, replaced by a sense of peace she had never known. As they stood in the courtyard, a small group of monks began to gather, their quiet steps echoing across the stone. They watched from a respectful distance, their eyes filled with wonder and reverence. Word of the miracle had begun to spread, and it was clear that the healing of Sophia was not just a private moment, but something that would soon ripple through the island. A few pilgrims approached cautiously, their eyes wide with hope and curiosity. One woman, holding a small child by the hand, came forward. The child's leg was wrapped in bandages, his face pale and drawn with pain. The mother's eyes, filled with desperation, searched Sophia's face as though looking for a sign, some proof that the miracle she had heard whispered among the monks was real. Sophia felt a pang of empathy as she looked at the boy. She could see herself in his frail figure, see the same fear and hopelessness that had once consumed her. Without thinking, she stepped forward, kneeling down in front of the child, her hands reaching out to gently touch his shoulder. "Hello," she said softly, her voice full of kindness. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated, his wide eyes darting between his mother and Sophia before answering in a small voice. "Nikos." Sophia smiled, her heart swelling with a mixture of sorrow and hope. "Nikos, I know how you feel. I was very sick too, but something amazing happened here today, and I believe that amazing things can happen for you too." The boy's mother knelt beside him, her eyes brimming with tears. "Do you think," she began, her voice breaking with emotion, "do you think God will heal him too?" Sophia hesitated for a moment, her mind racing back to her own journey, the pain, the doubt, the long road that had led her here. And then, without fully understanding why, she felt a deep conviction rise within her. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing: the power of faith, however fragile, was real. "I don't know what will happen," Sophia said softly, her eyes meeting the mother's. "But I believe that God hears every prayer. He heard mine, and I know He will hear yours too. Let's pray together." Father Nicholas, who had been watching from a few steps away, nodded approvingly as Sophia took the mother's hand and led them both in prayer. The courtyard grew still, the air filled with the soft murmurs of their voices as they called upon God's healing grace. As they prayed, Sophia felt a surge of peace, a quiet confidence that whatever happened next was in God's hands. She didn't need to understand everything, didn't need to have all the answers. She simply needed to trust. When the prayer ended, the mother wiped her tears and thanked Sophia with a tight embrace. The boy, Nikos, looked up at her with wide, hopeful eyes before being gently led away by his mother. Sophia stood there for a moment, watching as they disappeared into the crowd of pilgrims and monks, feeling the weight of what had just happened sink in. This was more than her miracle. It was a beginning, a ripple that would spread far beyond this monastery, touching the lives of others who, like her, had been lost in despair. Yaya Eleni, standing quietly by Sophia's side, wrapped her arm around her granddaughter's shoulders. "You are a light now, Sophia," she whispered. "God has healed you so that you may help others find their way." Sophia nodded, tears welling in her eyes once again. She wasn't just walking with her legs anymore. She was walking with a purpose that went beyond her own healing, a purpose that would carry her forward into a future filled with hope, faith, and the light of God's grace. Part 5. A New Dawn of Faith. The golden hues of the setting sun spilled through the windows of Sophia's home, casting a warm glow over the modest furnishings that had witnessed both her darkest days and now. her rebirth. The air inside was light, filled with the scent of fresh bread and the soft rustle of olive branches in the wind outside. Mykonos was alive with its usual vibrancy, but for Sophia, the island seemed to shimmer with a newfound brilliance, one that reflected the transformation she had undergone. Weeks had passed since her miraculous healing at the monastery of Panagia Turliani. Every day since had been a gift, each step a reminder of the grace she had been granted. Sophia moved with purpose now, her legs no longer bound by the mysterious illness that had once imprisoned her. But more than her physical recovery, it was the change in her spirit that defined her now. She had found something far more valuable than her ability to walk. She had found her faith again, restored and strengthened in a way she had never known before. Sophia stood at the window, gazing out at the sea that sparkled in the fading light. It had been weeks since her return from the monastery, but the memory of that day remained vivid in her mind. The peace she had felt, the warmth of God's presence, and the overwhelming love that had filled her heart. It had changed everything. The Sophia who had been lost in despair was gone, replaced by a woman who understood that faith wasn't about certainty, but about trust. Trust in the unknown, trust in the journey, and trust in a power greater than herself. The island had not been silent about her miracle. Word had spread quickly, and soon, people from all corners of Mykonos had come to hear her story. Pilgrims, families, and even strangers had knocked on her door, seeking hope, seeking answers. They had wanted to hear firsthand how a young woman, crippled by an illness no doctor could explain, had been restored to life, not just in body, but in spirit. And Sophia, though still adjusting to her new role, had opened her heart and her home to them all. She had become, as Yaya Eleni had predicted, a light for others. Her story had touched the hearts of many, and now people looked to her for guidance, for prayer, and for hope. It was a responsibility she had never asked for, but one she now embraced with humility and grace. Her small home had become a place of healing in its own right, where people gathered to pray, to share their burdens, and to find comfort in the presence of someone who had walked the path of suffering and emerged on the other side. That evening, as the sky deepened into shades of pink and purple, Sophia heard a knock at the door. She smiled, knowing it was another visitor seeking the story that had inspired so many. She walked to the door, her steps confident and sure, and opened it to find a young couple standing on the doorstep. The woman held a baby in her arms, and the man's face was lined with exhaustion, though his eyes held a spark of hope. "Please, we've heard of your healing," the man began, his voice trembling slightly. "Our son, he's sick, and the doctors, they don't know what to do. We've tried everything." Sophia's heart softened as she looked at the tiny child in the woman's arms. The baby's breathing was labored, his face pale, and his body limp. She could see the fear in the parents' eyes, the same fear she had once known so intimately. She stepped aside, motioning for them to come in. "Please come inside," Sophia said gently. "You must be exhausted." They entered her home, their movements slow and hesitant, as though they were afraid to hope for too much. Sophia guided them to the table, where Yaya Eleni sat quietly, her hands busy with knitting as they always were, though her eyes were full of knowing compassion. "We don't know what else to do," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible as she cradled her son. "He's so weak, we're so scared." Sophia sat down across from them, her eyes full of understanding. "I know how you feel. I was where you are now, lost and afraid. But you came here because you believe, somewhere deep inside, you believe that there is still hope." The man nodded, though tears welled in his eyes. "We want to believe. We've prayed, but it feels like no one is listening." Sophia reached across the table and took his hand, her touch firm yet gentle. "God is always listening. Sometimes it feels like our prayers are lost in the silence, but they are heard. You are not alone in this." She turned to Yaya Eleni, who smiled warmly and placed her knitting aside. Together, the two women began to pray, their voices steady and filled with conviction. The couple, hesitant at first, soon joined in, their whispered pleas blending with the soft murmurs of Sophia and Yaya. The room, bathed in the glow of the setting sun, seemed to hold its breath as the prayers filled the space. As they prayed, the baby's breathing began to steady. His small chest, once rising and falling with difficulty, seemed to relax. The parents, too, felt a shift, a quiet peace settling over them, easing the fear that had gripped their hearts for so long. When the prayer ended, the room was filled with a profound stillness, a sense that something greater had touched them all. The couple looked at their son, their eyes wide with wonder as they saw him sleeping peacefully, his tiny body no longer tense with pain. "Thank you," the mother whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." Sophia smiled softly, her heart full of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. "Don't thank me. Thank God, for He is the one who heals. Have faith and trust that He will guide you." The couple left her home that evening, their hearts lighter and their son resting peacefully in his mother's arms. As they walked away, Yaya Eleni turned to Sophia, her eyes twinkling with pride. "You have become a true vessel of God's light, Sophia," she said softly. "Your healing was not just for you. It was meant for all those who come to you, seeking hope." Sophia nodded, her gaze drifting back to the horizon, where the last rays of sunlight dipped below the sea. "I never imagined my life would take this path," she admitted, her voice quiet but steady. "But now, I can't imagine it any other way. God's plans are always greater than our own." In the weeks that followed, more people came to her, seeking the light that had been kindled within her. Some came for healing, others for comfort, and some simply to hear her story. And each time, Sophia welcomed them with open arms, sharing not just the miracle of her healing, but the deeper truth she had learned, that faith is a journey, one that often begins in darkness but always leads to the light. Her home, once a place of isolation and despair, had become a beacon of hope. The island of Mykonos, too, seemed to glow with a newfound energy, as though Sophia's healing had spread beyond her, touching the hearts of all who lived there. And though she still faced moments of doubt and uncertainty, Sophia knew now that she was never alone. God was with her, guiding her every step. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Sophia sat by her window, watching the waves gently lap against the shore. Her heart was full, not just with gratitude for the miracle she had received, but with the knowledge that she had been given a new purpose, a purpose to spread faith, to offer hope, and to walk always in the light of God's grace. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and experiences. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, God bless you.